My name is Nana May, and this happened to me. The bank alert arrived while I was standing at the florist, holding a bundle of white lilies meant for my husband's funeral. My phone vibrated softly in my palm, almost politely, as if it knew the timing was cruel. When I looked down, the message was short, cold, and final: account access removed. I read it once, then again, waiting for my mind to correct it, waiting for sense to return. It didn't. My chest tightened, not in panic yet, but in disbelief, the kind that freezes you in place. Behind the counter, the florist asked if I wanted a white ribbon or silver. For a second, I couldn't remember why I was there. Then the truth settled back in. My husband was dead. I answered white because it was the safe answer, the quiet answer. When I tried to pay, the card machine beeped sharply. Declined. The sound was louder than it should have been, sharp enough to make the woman behind me shift impatiently. I tried again. Declined. Heat rushed to my face, not from guilt, but from exposure. I mumbled something about another card and stepped aside, pretending to search my purse while my hands trembled. My phone buzzed again. This time it was the family WhatsApp group, the one I hadn't opened since the hospital. The message read, "Please don't make today harder than it already is." It was from Emily, my daughter-in-law. Confused, I scrolled up. Photos loaded slowly. The church entrance, folded programs, black coats, familiar faces. My husband's funeral, already underway. I was standing in a florist shop, locked out of my own money, watching my life continue without me. I typed that I was on my way. Before anyone replied, a private message appeared from Emily. She told me to keep things simple today. She mentioned my dress, said it was a bit much, reminded me that today was about Dad. Not my husband. Dad. The word stung more than I expected. I looked down at the navy dress I had chosen, the one my husband loved, the one he bought me before illness hollowed out our days, and for the first time, shame crept in where grief already lived. Outside, the air felt wrong. Too bright for a day like this. I sat in my car and opened my banking app. Locked. Savings locked. I called the bank, my voice steady only because I was too tired to panic. The woman on the line told me I was no longer an authorized user. Authorized, as if I had been borrowing my own life. When I told her my husband had died, she apologized quickly and suggested I contact the estate representative. She said the name as if it were nothing. Emily Harper, my daughter-in-law. I ended the call staring at my steering wheel, thinking of the night before my husband passed, how Emily had hovered near his bed with her phone in hand, telling me she would handle everything so I could rest. I had rested. I had trusted. My son finally answered when I called him. His voice was soft, careful, like he was managing a situation instead of talking to his mother. He said it wasn't a good time. I asked when he planned to tell me about the will, about the accounts, about the decisions made without me. He said Emily took care of the paperwork because it was easier that way. Easier for everyone, he said. I reminded him I was his wife, that I was coming to the church. There was a pause, just long enough to hurt, before he suggested I should rest today. In the background, I heard Emily's voice telling him not to let me cause a scene. That was the moment I understood something I didn't yet have words for. I was already the scene. The church parking lot was full when I arrived. People hugged me with pity and spoke in soft voices, as if I were something fragile that might shatter. I slipped into the back pew while the service had already begun. Emily turned when she heard the door. Her eyes flicked to my dress. She leaned toward the woman beside her and whispered something that made them smile. I stayed quiet. I had been staying quiet for years. The pastor spoke of my husband's kindness and his legacy. The word echoed painfully as I thought about the email waiting in my inbox, a digital will I hadn't signed, decisions I hadn't agreed to. When it was time to move forward, Emily stood first, flawless in black, perfectly appropriate. As I passed her, she leaned close and whispered that people would talk, that I really wore that dress anyway. I looked at her then, truly looked, and thought, you have no idea who I am. I took my seat beside the casket, my grief heavy and private. My phone buzzed once more. An unknown number. A law office handling my husband's estate. They said they needed to speak to me urgently. My hands went cold as I stared at the screen. realizing I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was being erased, quietly, efficiently, by the very people I trusted most. And I didn't yet know how much had already been taken before I even knew to look. My name is Nana May, and I wish I could say it ended at the funeral. It didn't. That night, after everyone left the church and the casseroles began arriving at my front door like obligations wrapped in foil, I sat alone at the dining table where my husband used to read the paper every morning. His chair was still pulled back, slightly crooked, as if he'd only stepped away for a moment. I didn't fix it. I couldn't. My phone lay beside my plate, face down, vibrating every few minutes with messages I didn't have the strength to open. I ate 2 bites of food, then pushed the plate away and finally opened the email from the law office. The subject line was formal, almost gentle. Estate documentation, immediate review required. Inside were attachments, too many of them. PDFs stacked like bricks. I opened the first one and felt my breath leave me slowly, painfully. It was a digital will. My husband's name was typed neatly at the top. The date was from 3 weeks ago. He had been sedated that entire week, drifting in and out, barely able to hold a pen, let alone make decisions about his life's work. Yet there it was, his name, followed by a digital signature. Below it, the executor, Emily Harper. Not me, not his wife of 42 years. Her. I scrolled, my eyes burning, my hands numb. Assets listed, property reassigned, accounts transferred into temporary management. Temporary. Such a harmless word for something that felt permanent. I searched for my name. It appeared only once, buried deep, under a clause that referred to spousal residence rights contingent upon cooperation. Cooperation. As if love could be audited. As if grief came with terms and conditions. I heard a knock at the door and nearly jumped out of my chair. For a brief, foolish moment, I hoped it was my husband, confused and late, asking why the house was so quiet. Instead, it was my son. He stood there holding a paper bag, his eyes tired, his shoulders slumped in a way that made him look like a boy again. He said he brought soup. He didn't meet my eyes when he stepped inside. We sat across from each other at the table, that was still open on my laptop between us like something alive. I asked him when he knew. He hesitated just long enough to answer the question without words. He said Emily had suggested the changes, said it was for my protection. That phrase hit me harder than anger. Protection from what? From my own marriage? From the life I helped build? I reminded him, softly, that I was there when the business was just an idea and a second mortgage. That I was the one who balanced the books when money was tight and stayed silent when his father worked late. He nodded, but his eyes kept drifting toward the screen, toward the paperwork already done. I told him I didn't sign anything. He said Emily handled the digital authorization because it was faster. I asked him if he thought that was right. He didn't answer. Silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable, until he finally said, "She just didn't want you overwhelmed." That was when I felt it, not just hurt, but something colder. A realization forming quietly. Decisions have been made about me, not with me, for a long time. After he left, I opened another attachment. Hospital consent forms. My signature scanned and attached to documents I had never seen. My name, my handwriting, replicated just well enough to pass. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stop myself from crying out. I remember the night the nurse asked who would handle paperwork, because I looked exhausted. I remembered Emily smiling and saying, "I've got it, Nana May." I had been grateful then. I had been foolish. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail this time, from the same law office. The lawyer's voice was careful, measured. He said there were discrepancies. He said my presence was required. He said something about potential misrepresentation. My heart pounded as I replayed the message twice, then a third time. Misrepresentation. That word didn't belong to me. It belonged to someone else. And for the first time since my husband died, something other than grief took hold. Anger. Quiet. Focused. Awake. I stood and walked through the house slowly, touching the walls, the photographs, the bookshelf my husband built himself. I thought of Emily standing in the church, whispering about my dress, so confident, so sure of her place. I wondered how sure she would be if the paper she relied on began to crack. My phone lit up again, this time a message from the family group chat. Emily had posted a reminder about estate coordination and asked everyone to be patient with the process. The replies were supportive. Heart emojis, prayers. No one asked where I stood in any of it. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. I stayed quiet. I had learned that silence, when chosen, could be a weapon. Before bed, I received one more email from the lawyer. A single line stood out, bolded at the bottom. Please bring any documents you personally signed during your husband's hospitalization. I closed the laptop slowly, my mind racing. I hadn't signed anything, which meant someone else had. And if that was true, then the story Emily was telling everyone, the story where she was the helpful daughter-in-law saving a grieving widow from herself, was built on something fragile. Lies break differently than glass. They don't shatter all at once. They crack, quietly, until one day the whole structure collapses under its own weight. As I turned off the lights, one thought stayed with me, steady and sharp. If she had forged my name once, what else had she done while I was resting? My name is Nana May, and I thought the hardest part of grief was the silence of an empty house. I was wrong. The hardest part was realizing that even in death, my husband's life could be rewritten without me. The first hint came from my phone. A WhatsApp message from my son pinged, short and strange. Mom, maybe take it easy today. Emily will handle things. Handle things. Those 3 words hit me like a slap I didn't see coming. I knew immediately what he meant. I was not welcome at the funeral in the way a mother expects. I was only welcome as a visitor, a shadow, a face in the crowd. I had been there through every struggle, every sleepless night, every hospital vigil. Yet now I was being sidelined, silenced, rendered invisible. I tried calling my daughter-in-law, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. Emily, I said, what are you talking about? This is my husband's funeral. I'm his wife. Silence, then a sharp intake of breath. Nana May, don't make this harder than it already is, she whispered. It was not a plea. It was a warning. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The dress I had chosen for him, navy elegant with the subtle embroidery he had loved, suddenly felt like armor I didn't deserve. My hands shook as I touched the fabric. The flowers were arranged on the bed beside me, lilies and roses, the same ones I had bought weeks before, hoping to surprise him on his birthday. Instead, they were a tribute, now meant for a funeral he didn't even know I would attend in the way a wife should. By the time I arrived at the church, I could feel the tension like static in the air. People I had known for decades were milling about, murmuring in hushed tones, smiling politely while their eyes darted to Emily, who moved through the room as if she were the widow herself. My son's face was pale, strained. He looked at me, then away, his body language betraying an uncomfortable mix of loyalty and fear. I walked slowly down the aisle, each step heavy, each breath measured. I didn't cry, though tears wanted to spring from nowhere. I didn't speak, though words clawed at the back of my throat. I was caught between mourning my husband and navigating the battlefield that my family had turned into a chessboard without my consent. Emily intercepted me before I could reach the front pew. She leaned slightly, a faint, calculated smile playing on her lips. Nana May, she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. Remember, less is more today. People will notice if you're too much. She gestured subtly at my dress. It's a funeral, not a celebration. I felt heat rise in my chest, a cocktail of anger and humiliation I had never anticipated. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab her by the shoulders and ask how dare she. But I stayed still, letting the words settle like poison. I realized then that this wasn't just a comment about a dress. It was a signal. She thought she controlled the narrative, and for a moment, she almost did. The service began, the pastor's voice calm and deliberate, but every word seemed punctuated by an unseen tension. Emily sat in the front row with my son beside her, their hands brushing lightly, a private signal to the world that they were in charge. I took my place slightly behind, aware of every whisper, every sideways glance. Each face I passed seemed to judge me, not for grief, but for daring to show up as my own self, fully present. I was becoming painfully aware that my presence itself was a disruption, a ripple in the carefully choreographed scene they had created. During the eulogy, I felt a pang of isolation. The pastor spoke of my husband's generosity, his dedication, his love for family. I wanted to stand and add my voice to say that I had been there, that I had been the one who soothed him, kept him safe, loved him fiercely through sickness and health. But every time I opened my mouth, I imagined Emily leaning back, smirking slightly, whispering to someone she doesn't get it. The thought made my stomach twist. I realized with a sinking heart that she had already rewritten my role in my own family. Then it happened. During the moment of silence, a cousin of mine leaned over and whispered, "Did you see the papers Emily handed the lawyer? She's managing everything." I froze. Managing everything. The words echoed in my mind like a warning bell. My husband's estate, his accounts, the house, even the funeral arrangements, they were being controlled by someone else. Someone who had smiled in my home, pretended to help, and now stood in the front row as the architect of my exclusion. I felt a surge of humiliation and betrayal, a heat rising from my chest to my throat. My fingers tightened around the edge of the pew, nails biting into the wood, as I realized just how far this had gone. The service continued, the congregation rising for hymns, for prayers, for moments of reflection. I stayed seated, aware of every shift of the room, every glance, every whispered conversation. Emily's gaze met mine briefly. She smiled, a small, confident, almost triumphant curl of her lips. I knew then that she believed she had won, that she had claimed the authority that should have been mine by right of love, of years of trust. But in that moment, anger began to build, quiet and controlled. I would not be erased. Not yet. Not without a fight. After the service, as mourners gathered near the casket to pay their respects, I saw her whisper to a friend, her fingers subtly gesturing toward me, a signal meant to guide attention, to control perception. I stepped forward anyway, slowly, deliberately, my presence undeniable. As I approached the casket, I felt eyes on me, some curious, some sympathetic, some judgmental. Emily shifted slightly, a flicker of unease in her expression. I did not stop. I did not falter. I laid my hand on the polished wood, closed my eyes, and whispered words only he could hear, words of love and farewell. Words that reminded me that no legal document, no manipulation, no whispered warning could take away the truth of our shared life. When I turned, I caught Emily staring, her confidence faltering for just a second. The moment passed quickly, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that I had power too. Quiet, unyielding power, built on knowledge, on patience, on a lifetime of being underestimated. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The message had been sent. And then my phone buzzed again. Another message, this one from an unknown number. "Mrs. Harper, this is the law office handling your husband's estate. Urgent. We need to speak immediately." I read it twice, 3 times. My hands went cold. The funeral had ended. The mourners had left. The flowers were being packed away. And yet my life had shifted entirely in a matter of hours. I wasn't just grieving. I was confronting a deliberate attempt to erase me from decisions, from authority, from recognition. And I realized with sharp clarity that this was only the beginning. My name is Nana May, and the first betrayal after my husband's funeral didn't come with shouting, or a fight, or a single face-to-face confrontation. It came quietly, in a voice note, on my phone, a message that Emily had sent, not to me, but to someone else, and had accidentally left lingering in my WhatsApp notifications for long enough for me to hear it. I was folding my husband's shirts that morning, the ones he'd worn on holidays, birthdays, and ordinary days that now seemed like relics of a life abruptly stolen. My hands brushed over the fabric, and I imagined his fingers, the gentle curves, the calluses, the warmth of the man I had loved for over 40 years. Then my phone buzzed. A single notification. I ignored it, but a second buzz came, insistent. And then I noticed something peculiar. A tiny, partially loaded audio file from an unknown number. I tapped it and then heard her voice. "She doesn't know yet," Emily said, laughing lightly, almost sweetly. "As long as she stays quiet, everything stays safe. Just don't let her talk to the lawyer alone." I froze, my fingers tightening on a shirt. Safe? Everything stays safe? She was speaking about me, about my life, about my husband's estate, about my grief. Her laugh, casual and confident, dug into me. She wasn't scared. She didn't hesitate. She had assumed my silence. She had assumed I would not act. I pressed replay. Again and again. The words, simple and cruel, embedded themselves like shards of glass in my chest. My husband had died, yes, but she was already rewriting my life, manipulating my family, controlling access to what had always been mine. The funeral, the whispers, the dress, everything had been part of a larger design, and I was only realizing it now. Anger flared inside me, sharp, precise. My grief had been weaponized against me, my mourning used as a shield behind which someone could quietly steal control. I sent the voice note immediately to the lawyer handling the estate. My hand shook, my chest ached, but a part of me felt alive. This was my first real step back into the fight for my life, my dignity, my authority. I sat on the edge of the bed, surrounded by shirts and memories, trying to breathe. How had it come to this? How had someone I had trusted, loved, welcomed into my home, infiltrated my family, and smiled at me while undermining everything I had built with my husband for decades? I thought about all the nights I had sat up with him, comforting him, managing bills, keeping the household afloat. And now, the one who had never sacrificed a single night for our family was running everything, believing she had outsmarted me. The next few days became a blur. Calls from the lawyer, questions about the estate, requests for documentation. I began combing through every file, every email, every paper my husband had left behind. I found inconsistencies, signatures I didn't recognize, documents I had never signed but were filed as if I had. The reality was clear. Emily had moved with precision. She had forged consent, scanned signatures, manipulated the system. And yet, she had made one fatal mistake. She had assumed I wouldn't notice. She had assumed I would remain quiet. By the third day, I had assembled a stack of evidence so thick it felt like armor. Every forged signature, every email trail, every financial transfer was documented. I began preparing my confrontation, not with rage, but with careful precision. Anger is fleeting. Evidence is enduring. Emily didn't realize I had already seen the cracks. Her confidence, her smirk, the way she assumed control. Those were about to be her undoing. I watched her movements through family WhatsApp updates, noticed her subtle manipulations in calls, in messages, even in the careful way she arranged flowers at my husband's memorial service. Every detail she had orchestrated became part of the evidence I was compiling. When I finally met with the lawyer, I realized something critical. Silence is powerful only when everyone else believes it. My silence had been assumed. Now, armed with knowledge, I was no longer invisible. I spoke softly at first, my voice steady, measured. I didn't need to shout, because every fact I presented carried weight. Every forged document, every copied signature, every email chain was a nail in the coffin of her assumed authority. Emily's confidence began to falter in that room. Her carefully constructed image cracked with each piece of evidence, and the first real victory I felt was not legal, but psychological. She believed she had orchestrated everything flawlessly. She had forgotten one thing. I was not just grieving. I was watching. I was documenting. I was ready. The realization hit me as I walked out of the lawyer's office that evening. The fight for my family, my estate, my dignity had only just begun. But for the first time since my husband's death, I felt a spark of something I had thought extinguished. Hope, yes, but also determination. Emily had underestimated me, and that was her first mistake. I spent the next hours reviewing financial documents late into the night. Bank alerts, account transfers, and property papers lay open in front of me. Each line item a testament to manipulation, each signature a reminder of betrayal. I began making notes, creating a plan. If she had dared to assume she could control everything silently, she hadn't accounted for me. My phone buzzed again, this time a simple text from my son. "Mom, are you okay?" I didn't answer immediately. I needed to plan my next steps before speaking to anyone. The last time I had trusted without verification, the result had been exclusion, humiliation, and a funeral where I had felt erased. Now, I was gathering the tools to ensure that would never happen again. By the time the house was quiet and the moonlight poured through the windows, I had formulated my strategy. This wasn't just about recovering the estate or correcting the paperwork. This was about reclaiming my place in the family, asserting my voice, and proving that silence cannot dominate truth. And as I lay down that night, staring at the ceiling, I repeated to myself the mantra my husband had once whispered in a quiet moment: trust yourself. Always. I realized then that I was ready, not just to fight, but to win. My name is Nana May, and the moment I stepped into that lawyer's office, I realized that grief had its own weight, but betrayal had a sharper edge. The walls were sterile beige, the lighting too bright, the air conditioned to an almost painful chill. I walked in slowly, each step deliberate, my hands folded in front of me, trying to maintain the calm I had spent the last few nights cultivating. Emily was already there, seated at the long conference table, her folder of documents spread out like a shield, her posture immaculate, her smile sharp. My son was next to her, tense, hesitant, like a man caught between loyalty and fear. The lawyer greeted me politely and motioned for me to sit. I did. My eyes briefly met Emily's. She smiled, that same subtle curl of confidence, but there was a flicker there, almost imperceptible. A tiny crack in the armor she thought was impenetrable. I allowed myself a private smile, one she couldn't see. She had underestimated me. The lawyer began the meeting with questions about the documents she had filed after my husband's death. "Mrs. Harper, did you authorize these changes?" His voice was calm, neutral, but each word landed like a weight in the room. I took a deep breath. No, Emily's laugh was soft, almost dismissive. "She's under a lot of stress," she said. I was only helping. Her words were precise, polished, the kind of words meant to sway, to confuse, to make people doubt themselves. But I didn't flinch. Then the lawyer did something I hadn't expected. He played the voice note, the one she had accidentally left in my WhatsApp. Emily's smile faltered. Her hand froze midair as if caught in a spotlight. My son looked at me, then really looked, his eyes wide, a mixture of fear and guilt crossing his face. The words, "She doesn't know yet. As long as she stays quiet, everything stays safe," hung in the room, heavy and suffocating. Emily tried to speak, but no sound came. The evidence had stripped her of her confidence. Just for a moment, but it was enough. The lawyer outlined the gravity of the situation. Forged signatures, misrepresentation of authority, attempts to manipulate accounts and estate decisions. Words like fraud and temporary injunction were thrown around, but I only heard the clarity in them. Every step Emily had taken had been deliberate, calculated. Every smile, every whisper, every subtle manipulation had been designed to keep me in the shadows. And yet she had made a fatal mistake. She had assumed I would remain silent. Emily tried to explain herself. "I was protecting the family," she said, her voice rising slightly now, betraying panic she didn't intend to show. "I didn't think," she stopped. I didn't interrupt. I let her voice hang in the air like a puzzle piece I already understood. My son finally asked why he hadn't been told everything. Tears formed in her eyes. Real, convincing, the kind that make others doubt themselves. But I had learned long ago that tears cannot rewrite facts. For the next hour, we went through every document, every transfer, every note. I watched Emily grow smaller under the scrutiny, her confidence replaced by anxiety. The lawyer asked questions she hadn't anticipated, revealing gaps in her narrative, inconsistencies in her claims. Each time she tried to speak, I stayed quiet, letting the weight of her words, her miscalculations, and her exposure settle around her. Silence had become my weapon, just as manipulation had been hers. I realized then that this confrontation wasn't just legal. It was psychological. Emily had believed she controlled the room, the family, the estate. But she hadn't accounted for my patience, my preparation, or my resolve. I felt a sense of calm authority I hadn't expected. The anger from the funeral, the humiliation, the whispered commands to behave, all transformed into focus, clarity, and control. After the meeting, the lawyer pulled me aside. "You have more power than you think," he said. "You've documented everything. The injunction protects your rights. She cannot touch the estate without your consent." I nodded, but I felt the weight of the next steps pressing down on me. This wasn't over. Legal leverage was one thing, but Emily's manipulation ran deeper. It was woven into family dynamics, relationships, even my son's loyalty. When I left the office, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calculated. I had reclaimed a small piece of authority, but I knew Emily would react. I expected retaliation, subtle, quiet, the kind that comes through whispered calls, late-night messages, or well-placed comments designed to undermine me. And I was ready. That night, I reviewed every piece of correspondence, every email, every WhatsApp message, every note in my husband's handwriting. I found the subtle ways Emily had tried to isolate me, to erase me from decisions, from discussions, from recognition. It was almost impressive, the thoroughness of her planning, but impressive or not, it had failed. She had assumed I would not notice, would not act, would not fight. She had underestimated me. My son called later that night. "Mom, are you okay?" His voice was quiet, hesitant, almost pleading. I didn't answer immediately. I allowed the silence to stretch, to teach him that actions have consequences, and that the person he thought powerless had been quietly gathering strength. "I'm fine," I said finally, soft but firm. "I'm just getting organized." I knew then that the next confrontation would not be in a sterile office or under the gaze of a lawyer. It would be in the home, in the family, in the subtle shifts of power that happen when someone realizes they are no longer in control. Emily would try again. She would push, manipulate, and attempt to regain her dominance. But I had learned something invaluable in that office. Preparation, knowledge, and patience are stronger than confidence without foundation. I spent the next few days reviewing bank accounts, property papers, and the documents my husband had left behind. Each discovery, each piece of evidence, added to a growing sense of authority. I was no longer the sidelined widow. I was an active participant, fully aware of every manipulation, every forgery, every attempt to remove me from the life I had built. Emily tried contacting me multiple times over the next week. I ignored her calls. Her texts went unanswered. She was a storm contained, trying desperately to regain some foothold, but every effort only revealed her panic, her fear, her realization that she had underestimated me. Meanwhile, I documented everything, every communication, every misstep, every interaction. My son watched quietly, unsure how to intervene, caught between loyalty to his wife and recognition of the truth. By the time the weekend arrived, I had created a plan not just to protect my husband's estate, but to ensure my family could no longer manipulate or erase me. I was prepared for the next meeting with the lawyer, with my son, and, if necessary, with Emily herself. For the first time since my husband's death, I felt the quiet satisfaction of control. Not vengeance, not anger, control. I realized then that this was the moment where grief and strategy intersect. I would honor my husband's memory, protect my family, and reclaim the authority that had been quietly stripped away. And as I lay down that night, reviewing every detail, every email, every subtle message of manipulation, I whispered to myself, they underestimated me. Never again. My name is Nana May, and I realized that power does not always roar. Sometimes it seeps quietly, almost imperceptibly, until everyone notices it, and by then, it is too late. The days after the confrontation at the lawyer's office were strange. Emily no longer smiled at me with that calculated confidence. The calls she sent, once brimming with authority and subtle control, now lingered unanswered. She tried to appear calm, to maintain the illusion of control, but I could see it in her eyes. Panic. I had never seen her like that before. The little smirk she always wore, the one that had been a shield and a weapon against me, had faded into something fragile, nervous, hesitant. It began slowly. Friends and relatives who had previously aligned with Emily started to ask questions, quietly, cautiously, as though testing the waters. "Are you okay?" one distant cousin asked over the phone. I wasn't sure what happened at the funeral. I answered carefully, softly, never revealing too much, but always asserting just enough presence to let them know I was aware. I was not silent. I had been overlooked, underestimated, but that was over. Each call, each whispered message was a tiny victory. Slowly, the tide was turning, and it began to feel almost like a quiet revenge, not through words, but through recognition. I spent the following days reviewing every document I could find in my husband's study. Bank statements, property deeds, his old letters, even digital backups of contracts. Emily had assumed that once she orchestrated her little coup, her takeover of accounts, the estate, even funeral arrangements, no one would notice. But I noticed. I had noticed every signature that didn't belong to me, every alteration in the paperwork that had never been discussed, every transfer made in my name without my consent. It was a meticulous, almost methodical attempt to erase me from my own family, from my own home, from my own husband's legacy. I began creating a record of every manipulation. I wrote everything down in a notebook, every detail, every date, every slight, every lie. The more I documented, the more I realized the sheer audacity of Emily's plan. She had believed that grief would paralyze me, that mourning would be my weakness. She had assumed I would remain passive, overwhelmed, invisible. But she had forgotten something important. I am not someone who disappears quietly when wronged. I am not someone who allows manipulation to stand unchallenged. I am Nana May, and I had spent a lifetime understanding people, seeing patterns, and knowing when someone underestimated me. The first tangible shift of power came when the lawyer sent a confirmation that a temporary injunction had been placed on the estate accounts. Emily's access was frozen. She could no longer transfer funds, manipulate the house, or present herself as the authority. I remember the moment I read the email. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by anticipation. I knew this was only the beginning. Legal leverage is powerful, yes, but the emotional battlefield, the family, was far more complex. She would react, subtly, maybe even cunningly. And she did. Emily tried to contact me multiple times. She called my phone, sent texts, even attempted messages through my son. Each one was carefully measured, polite on the surface, laced with suggestion and manipulation underneath. "Mom," one text read, "let's talk. I think we can resolve this peacefully." Another message was sharper. "Please don't take legal action without speaking to me first." I didn't reply. Not yet. I waited. Every unanswered message added to her unease. Every ignored attempt a quiet assertion of control that belonged to me. During this time, I also began to notice subtle changes in my son. He had been loyal to Emily, perhaps more than he realized, and he had been complicit in some ways, not out of malice, but out of belief in her narrative. Yet now, as he watched Emily's confidence crack, he began to look to me for guidance. He asked questions hesitantly, cautiously, almost testing me. "Mom, are we doing the right thing?" I looked at him quietly, letting the weight of experience and truth settle. "Yes," I said softly. "We are doing what is right. But we need to be careful. She will try again." His eyes widened. I could see a flicker of understanding, a dawning recognition that the person he had underestimated, his mother, was far stronger than he had imagined. As the days passed, I realized that the power shift was not about anger or vengeance. It was about recognition, about asserting a rightful place in my own life. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped defending my presence in my own home. I acted with clarity, with calm authority. I began to reclaim small things first: access to documents, control over certain accounts, decisions about household matters. Emily would offer suggestions or make comments, and I would simply acknowledge them politely, but firmly. My son began to follow suit, subtly reinforcing boundaries I had set. One evening, Emily arrived unannounced at the house, carrying a folder filled with documents, her posture tense, her smile gone. She tried to appear composed, professional, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her anxiety. She tried to negotiate, to persuade, to appeal to my supposed sense of kindness. "Nana May," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I think we can work this out. I don't want conflict." I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence hang, long enough for her unease to grow. Finally, I said, softly but with unmistakable authority. I stayed quiet to keep the peace. But peace that costs her dignity isn't peace at all. She left without another word, and I felt a small, private victory. In the following weeks, I began to notice the subtle tremors of influence shifting. Friends and relatives who had previously remained neutral or aligned with Emily started contacting me. They sought advice, clarification, validation. The whispers that had once undermined me now supported me. People who had believed Emily's narrative began to question her motives. And I realized, for the first time in weeks, that my presence was no longer merely tolerated. It was acknowledged. My voice mattered. My authority mattered. I was no longer invisible. The final shift came with my own internal clarity. I began to understand that the battle was not only about documents or control. It was about recognition, about asserting dignity, about proving that grief does not equate to weakness. I began to move through my days with calm precision, aware of every interaction, every glance, every subtle attempt at manipulation. I had learned to anticipate, to recognize, and to respond, not with fury, but with measured, deliberate power. By the end of the month, the first real cracks in Emily's control were visible. She had assumed her confidence and strategy were unassailable. She had counted on my silence, on my grief, on my passivity. But she had not counted on patience, observation, and careful planning. I had learned that true power does not need to be loud. It does not require a show of force. It is quiet, precise, and undeniable. One night, I sat alone in the living room, reviewing every email, every message, every note my husband had left behind. I felt a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. The power was slowly returning. My family was beginning to recognize my presence again. Emily was faltering. And yet, I knew the next steps had to be precise. One miscalculation, one moment of haste, and all could be undone. My name is Nana May, and the real betrayal often comes not in words, not in whispers or smirks, but in the quiet, clinical precision of paperwork. I had suspected Emily's manipulations, yes, but I hadn't realized how deep her deceit ran until the hospital called. It was a routine follow-up about my husband's medical records, but the tone in the nurse's voice was strange, careful, measured, almost too polite. "Mrs. Harper, we need to verify your consent forms. There seems to be a discrepancy." My stomach tightened. I had signed nothing in recent weeks. How could there be discrepancies? When I arrived, the nurse pulled out a file thicker than I expected. I scanned it quickly, and then my eyes caught it. My signature, neat, precise, applied to forms I had never seen. Forms authorizing transfers, decisions about my husband's estate, even permissions for documents I had assumed remained locked and untouched. I looked up. The nurse's expression was apologetic, uncomfortable. These forms, they were submitted as if you signed them. We didn't notice at first. Someone may have. Her voice trailed off. I didn't need her to finish the sentence. Forgery. Fraud. Consent stolen. I felt a rush of emotions, anger, disbelief, humiliation, but I forced myself to stay calm. My mind worked in rapid, precise calculations. Every action Emily had taken now became part of a trail, a record, evidence of her manipulation. I requested copies of every form, every email, every message that could corroborate her involvement. Each document, each scanned signature, each carefully filed paper told the story of someone who had assumed control over my life while I was grieving. When I left the hospital, my son was waiting outside. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "Mom, is it true?" he asked. I nodded, the weight of the realization heavy in my chest. "Yes, it's all true. And it's worse than we thought. He looked down, shame flickering in his gaze. I trusted her. I took a deep breath, placing a gentle hand on his arm. Intent doesn't erase harm, I said softly. He flinched at the truth, but I knew he needed to hear it. Back at home, I spent hours cross-referencing documents, emails, and messages. Every forged signature, every manipulated account transfer, every decision made in my name without my consent became part of the evidence I compiled for the lawyer. Emily had assumed her manipulations would remain hidden. She had assumed that grief would silence me, that the funeral, the whispered criticisms about my dress, the subtle sidelining in conversations would keep me passive. She had underestimated me. I reached out to the lawyer again, sending scanned copies of every document, every discrepancy I had found. His response was swift. An injunction could be expanded. Legal measures could prevent further tampering, and evidence was strong enough to challenge all unauthorized decisions. For the first time since my husband's death, I felt a flicker of hope. Control was returning. Emily, of course, noticed the shift. Her calls and messages increased, each one more desperate, more frantic than the last. Nana May, can we discuss this before legal action? One message read. Another, please don't involve anyone else. We can fix this quietly. I did not respond. Silence had become my weapon, just as manipulation had been hers. She had assumed she could control me with casual cruelty, subtle intimidation, and well-placed lies. She had not accounted for patience, knowledge, and determination. The following week, Emily arrived at the house unannounced. I was in the kitchen organizing papers when she walked in, folder clutched tightly in her hands. Her expression was tense, polite, but her confidence was gone. Nana May, she began, voice careful. I think we can resolve this without further conflict. I did not respond immediately. I allowed the silence to stretch, to let her anxiety grow. Finally, I spoke, calm, deliberate, authoritative. I stayed quiet to keep the peace. But peace that costs your dignity isn't peace at all. She left without another word, and I felt a quiet satisfaction. The tables had turned. My son was struggling with his own guilt. He had been complicit, not because he intended harm, but because he had trusted Emily. We had long conversations late at night about responsibility, integrity, and the consequences of actions. Mom, I didn't know, he whispered one night. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Knowing doesn't erase harm, but understanding the truth is the first step in making things right. He nodded, a flicker of maturity, of recognition, passing over his face. The lawyer confirmed the forged signatures were enough to challenge the estate transfers and restore my authority over accounts and property. Emily's power was no longer unchallenged. She had assumed that manipulation and silence equaled control. She had been wrong. I was no longer grieving in silence. I was no longer passive. I was a force, deliberate, calculated, and prepared. In the evenings, I reviewed every interaction, every subtle manipulation she had attempted over the past weeks. Her plan had been thorough, almost impressive in its audacity, but flawed in one critical way. She had underestimated me. She had assumed grief would be my weakness. It wasn't. Grief had sharpened my resolve. Pain had strengthened my awareness. Loss had reminded me of my strength. One evening, while reviewing documents, I found a subtle note my husband had left years earlier, tucked inside a folder. Nana May, always verify. Trust yourself above all. His words, simple, intimate, profound, reminded me that this fight was never just about money or property. It was about recognition, truth, and survival. The estate, the accounts, the house, they were symbols of control, but the real battle was about dignity and authority within my own family. By the end of the week, Emily's manipulations had been exposed. Her confidence was gone, her tactics no longer effective. Friends and relatives began quietly acknowledging my role, my authority, my presence. I no longer explained myself or justified my actions. I acted with clarity, decisiveness, and quiet authority. Every step, every decision, every refusal to engage in manipulation became a subtle lesson to my family and to Emily. I am here. I matter. My voice is not to be silenced. The final moment came unexpectedly. I discovered another document buried deep in a digital folder showing one last attempt by Emily to claim authority over a minor account. I forwarded it to the lawyer immediately. Within hours, it was resolved. Legal authority had been fully restored to me. Emily's power had been diminished, her influence curtailed. The final cracks had appeared in the carefully constructed illusion she had built around herself. That night, I sat in the living room, alone, reflecting. I had reclaimed my authority, exposed deception, and restored control over my life. I had learned a critical lesson. Power is not always visible, not always loud, but it is undeniable when coupled with patience, knowledge, and clarity. Emily had assumed she could outsmart me, but she had underestimated the quiet determination of someone who has lived a life of vigilance, love, and experience. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm. The estate was secure. My family was beginning to recognize my presence again. Emily was retreating, cautious, aware that her position was no longer assured. And I realized something profound. The battle was not just about documents, accounts, or property. My name is Nana May, and just when I thought I had regained control, the world reminded me that family secrets have a way of lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to explode. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my phone buzzed with a notification from a new app my son had been experimenting with, a DNA test service. At first, I ignored it, but then he called, his voice hesitant, unsure. "Mom, you should check this. It's about Emily." I frowned, my stomach tightening. "What do you mean?" It's a DNA verification. Something about inheritance rules. The app flagged an anomaly. I felt a chill creep through me. An anomaly? I had faced forged signatures, stolen accounts, manipulations, and humiliation, but now DNA. That wasn't something you could argue with. It was proof irrefutable. I opened the app. A digital report flashed across the screen, color-coded, precise, clinical. My heart pounded as I read. Emily's son, or the child everyone had assumed was fully part of the family, did not share the DNA we had believed. Not with my son, not with my late husband, not with the bloodline that Emily had so boldly inserted herself into. I sank into the chair, gripping the edge. The room was suddenly silent, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. Everything I had seen, every manipulation, every subtle move to isolate me, suddenly clicked into place. Emily's confidence, her need to dominate, her casual cruelty. It had all been part of a plan to secure her position in the family, to solidify authority over someone who wasn't truly related. My son sat across from me, pale, anxious, unable to speak. Finally, he whispered, "Mom." "I didn't know." "I know," I said softly, my voice steady, though my chest ached. "I know, but that doesn't change what we do now." The revelation was staggering, but I couldn't afford to react impulsively. I had learned over the past weeks that patience, evidence, and timing were my weapons. Emily had assumed she could move freely because she believed I would be consumed by grief or fear. But I was no longer that woman. I was calculated, vigilant, and prepared. I contacted the lawyer immediately, forwarding the DNA results. He paused for a moment on the phone, then said, "This changes everything. Not just the estate, but her authority in the family. It's compromised." My mind raced. For years, I had been careful, respectful, patient. I had allowed Emily to flaunt her perceived authority, and in doing so, she had revealed her own arrogance. She believed she was untouchable. She had counted on everyone's trust, on my son's compliance, on the illusion that she belonged. But the DNA report tore that illusion apart. I spent the next days observing her carefully. She continued to operate with subtlety, trying to maintain appearances in front of the family. She laughed at jokes, offered advice on household matters, even attempted to organize events in the house. But behind her polished exterior, I could see the panic in her eyes, the cracks in her smile. She had always assumed control, but now she was aware that I knew something that could unravel everything. I realized then that power is not just about control. It's about perception. Emily had assumed her perception was fixed. Everyone believed she belonged. Everyone deferred to her. But truth has a way of breaking illusions. The DNA test was a shockwave, invisible to others at first, but potent. Once the knowledge settled, it would alter dynamics, loyalties, and trust. I began subtly gathering allies, friends and relatives who had been quiet, who had sensed something off but lacked proof, now found validation in small, carefully chosen disclosures. There's something you should know, I would say, careful, measured. The documents, the estate, even the child's inheritance, it's not what it seems. I watched, satisfied as curiosity and doubt spread. Emily's carefully maintained facade was beginning to crumble. The next confrontation happened at dinner. Emily tried to control conversation, steer attention, and assert her authority. But I had shifted tactics. I spoke softly, deliberately about documents, about trust, about transparency. My son nodded subtly, reinforcing my presence without drawing attention. Emily's attempts at control faltered. She laughed nervously, tried to change topics, but I could see the tension growing. Later that night, I confronted Emily privately. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply laid out the facts, measured, calm, undeniable. Emily, I said, the DNA test, it changes everything. You are no longer untouchable. You have manipulated, deceived, and misrepresented yourself. But now the truth is clear. Her eyes widened, a flash of panic crossing her face. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said nothing. I let silence do the work. Silence has always been my ally, and tonight it spoke volumes. The next days were a mix of strategic observation and subtle pressure. I allowed the family to see my composure, my confidence. I refused to engage in shouting matches, arguments, or dramatic confrontations. Instead, I moved quietly, deliberately, each action measured, each word calculated. Friends, relatives, even distant cousins began questioning Emily's authority, her narrative. They looked to me now, to my experience, my clarity, my unwavering presence. Emily, of course, reacted. She tried to subtly influence my son, sending whispered messages, attempting to manipulate perception to maintain control. But the DNA report had shifted the ground beneath her feet. Her confidence was no longer absolute. Every attempt to manipulate me, to isolate me, to assert her authority, only revealed her growing desperation. By the end of the week, the power shift was undeniable. I was no longer the grieving widow pushed to the side. I was the woman who held evidence, knowledge, and truth. I controlled not just perception, but facts. Emily's position, once solid, was now tenuous. Every action she took to assert dominance was met with quiet, deliberate resistance. The final moment of realization came unexpectedly. While reviewing family group chats, I noticed a subtle change. Emily's messages, once confident and directive, were now hesitant, carefully worded, polite but cautious. Even the way she signed off emails had shifted, no longer sharp, commanding, or brash, but tempered, anxious, aware. She knew the balance of power had shifted. She knew she could no longer move freely. I sat in the living room that evening, reflecting. The DNA report was not just a revelation about inheritance or legitimacy, it was a turning point. It reminded me that family, no matter how close, is never immune to secrets, lies, and manipulations. But it also reminded me of something more important. Patience, preparation, and clarity are stronger than confidence built on deception. I whispered to myself, softly, almost reverently, they underestimated me. I am not invisible. I am not powerless. I am Nana May. And in that quiet moment, as the evening light faded and the house settled into silence, I understood the full weight of the battle ahead. It was no longer just about documents, accounts, or the estate. It was about dignity, authority, and truth. Emily had believed she could erase me. She had believed her lies would stand. But the truth always finds a way. And I was ready. My name is Nana May, and I never expected a single live stream to unravel months of deception. It started as an ordinary Sunday. I was quietly reviewing documents in the living room, sipping tea, when my son's phone buzzed. A notification. Live stream starting now, Emily Harper. My heart skipped a beat. Emily had always used public spaces to assert control. But this was bold, calculated, and reckless. Curiosity and caution wrestled inside me. I grabbed my son's tablet and clicked the link. The video was live. Emily sitting in the family room, my home, the camera pointed at her with flawless precision. She smiled, seemingly composed, speaking to an audience I couldn't see yet. "Hello, everyone," she began, voice polished, rehearsed. "Today I'm going to share some updates about the Harper family estate." I froze. She was broadcasting our private affairs to the public. The accounts, the documents, the family decisions she had tried to manipulate. She was exposing them, but twisting the story to make herself the hero. My pulse quickened. Every viewer she reached was a potential ally, a witness to her narrative. And yet, she had underestimated me. She didn't realize that every word, every gesture, every slight misstep could be used against her. I started taking notes, capturing screenshots, recording timestamps. My son hovered nearby, whispering, "Mom, what do we do?" I shook my head slightly, not looking up. "We observe. We gather evidence. She's playing into our hands." My calmness surprised him. He had seen me grief-stricken, humiliated, sidelined, but this was a new Nana May. Calculated, patient, unflinching. Emily continued speaking, detailing the estate management, subtly undermining my role, framing herself as the responsible party. "I've been working tirelessly to protect the family assets," she said, glancing at the camera. "It's not easy, especially with complications." She didn't name me, but the message was clear. I was the obstacle, the complication. I felt a cold clarity. Everything she had done to belittle me, every whispered insult, every sly maneuver, it was all unraveling now, and I was watching. The live stream took a turn I hadn't anticipated. Emily began reading aloud from documents, claiming authority she didn't have. She misrepresented signatures, misstated facts, and inadvertently revealed inconsistencies in her story. I noted each one meticulously, knowing the lawyer would want every detail. Her own words were exposing her. Every carefully orchestrated manipulation, every forged signature, every attempt to control perception, lay bare for anyone paying attention. Halfway through the live stream, I saw it, a subtle hesitation, a flicker of panic in her eyes. She misread a page, stumbled over a date, and paused. My son leaned closer, whispering, "Mom, she's nervous." I nodded silently. That was all I needed. Confidence is a fragile thing, and hers was cracking under the weight of truth and exposure. Then came the most humiliating moment for her, and the turning point for me. Emily, attempting to explain a transaction, accidentally revealed the account she thought was private, showing it as if she had authority over it. In reality, the lawyer had frozen the account days ago. Anyone following along could see the discrepancy. Her carefully crafted image of control faltered. Comments began flooding in from viewers, questioning her authority. I could hear my son muttering under his breath, astonished at how quickly she was unraveling. I decided to intervene, not by confrontation, but strategically. I recorded a private voice note, calmly, measured, for my son to send as a response to Emily. "Mom and I are reviewing everything. Your statements are inaccurate and misrepresented. Please pause any public discussion until verified." The message was simple, authoritative, unflinching. Emily's smile faltered as she read it aloud on her live stream. Confusion flickered across her face. For the first time, she realized someone was actively monitoring, responding, and challenging her narrative in real time. The next moments were critical. She tried to recover, to assert composure, but the damage was done. Her own words were being questioned, her authority doubted, her narrative shattered. Friends and family who were watching silently began reaching out privately, confirming suspicions, expressing doubts, and quietly aligning with me. Emily had underestimated the reach of transparency and the power of a vigilant Nana May. After the live stream ended, I spoke with my son about the impact. "This," I said, "is why patience and preparation matter more than anger." She thought broadcasting would strengthen her position. Instead, she weakened it. He nodded, understanding dawning. He had seen manipulation, deception, and betrayal firsthand, but he had never seen the full weight of strategic control. I was no longer just grieving. I was orchestrating, guiding, and reclaiming authority. Later that evening, Emily tried to contact me directly. Her tone was measured, cautious, almost pleading. Nana May, I think we should discuss the live stream. It got out of hand. I listened silently, letting every word land. We'll discuss when the facts are clear, I said softly. No anger, no drama, just calm authority. She understood. She had lost her unchallenged control. I spent the next week compiling evidence from the live stream. Screenshots, timestamps, recordings, and public comments. The lawyer reviewed everything, nodding in approval. This strengthens your position immensely, he said. Not only legally, but in terms of family perception. You've reclaimed authority, credibility, and visibility all in one move. I allowed myself a small smile. Emily's reaction was gradual but undeniable. She became more cautious, less assertive, and more desperate in private. My son began to stand firmer, subtly reinforcing boundaries I had set. Friends, relatives, even distant family members began seeking my guidance. The tables had turned completely, and I watched it unfold with measured satisfaction. By the end of the week, it was clear. Emily's influence was waning. Her live stream, intended to consolidate power, had backfired spectacularly. She had revealed not strength, but weakness, not authority, but desperation. And all of it had been visible to anyone willing to look. I realized then that the battle was not just about documents, inheritance, or appearances. It was about perception, truth, and timing. Emily had assumed she controlled reality. But reality is fragile, and when truth intervenes, the illusion collapses. I had learned that visibility, patience, and strategic action are far more powerful than anger or confrontation. That night, I sat alone, reflecting on the live stream. I felt a mix of satisfaction and quiet vigilance. The exposure was just one step in reclaiming authority and dignity. Emily had been publicly challenged, privately shaken, and her control was fractured. But I knew she would continue to test limits, attempt subtle manipulations, and probe weaknesses. I had to remain vigilant, measured, and deliberate. I whispered softly, almost to myself, control is not taken. It is observed, calculated, and reclaimed. And I am watching. The room was quiet. The house settled into the gentle hum of evening, but I knew the battle was far from over. Emily had been exposed, yes, but the true test of authority and dignity would come in the final moves, the ones that required patience, strategy, and unwavering calm. My name is Nana May, and nothing prepares you for the quiet moment when months of betrayal finally converge in one room. It was a Thursday morning, sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors, when I arrived at the lawyer's office. My son was beside me, tense but resolute. Emily sat across from us, attempting composure, fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve. The lawyer cleared his throat. We have completed our review, he began. Regarding the Harper estate, accounts, and legal authority. He paused, eyes on Emily. First, the forged signatures, unauthorized transfers, and misrepresented documents have been officially invalidated. Emily's face went pale. She opened her mouth, but no words came. For the first time, fear replaced her carefully constructed confidence. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not vengeance, just the calm authority of someone finally recognized. The lawyer continued, flipping through pages. Second, the DNA results are verified. The child in question is not biologically related to the late Mr. Harper. Silence fell. Emily's composure cracked. My son's hand found mine, a silent acknowledgement of shared relief and disbelief. Months of whispers, subtle humiliations, and manipulation led to this. Emily's power was gone, not by confrontation, but by truth, patience, and careful observation. She had underestimated me. Finally, the lawyer said, authority over the estate, accounts, and all decisions is fully restored to Mrs. Harper. He paused again, glancing at Emily. She seemed to shrink in place. The mask of control she wore so confidently was gone. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of authority settle. Dignity, not anger, had reclaimed my position. My son whispered, "Mom." I didn't realize. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did what you thought was right. Understanding now is what matters." Emily tried to interject. "This isn't fair," the lawyer cut her off politely but firmly. "All legal matters are resolved. Any dispute must follow formal procedures." Emily's shoulders slumped, power stripped, confidence shattered. Then, the lawyer cleared his throat one last time. "There's one final matter, a confidential document from the late Mr. Harper, addressed to you, Nana May." My heart skipped. I had no idea what this could be. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside, a letter in his familiar handwriting guided me through family matters, financial arrangements, and a warning. "Trust your intuition, patience, and understanding. You are the pillar of this family. Guard your authority wisely." Relief, vindication, and lingering sadness mingled. The months of manipulation, humiliation, and grief had left emotional scars, but clarity and authority were restored. Emily's influence was dismantled, her confidence gone, and my presence firmly acknowledged. Outside the lawyer's office, sunlight felt symbolic. My son walked quietly beside me, absorbing the weight of the lessons. Manipulation hides in plain sight. Vigilance is essential, and patience can reclaim power lost to deceit. At home, I placed my husband's letter on the mantel, a quiet monument to foresight and trust. Emily avoided eye contact, moving cautiously. She had misjudged me, and now she faced the consequences, not through confrontation, but through quiet, undeniable authority. That evening, as I reflected, satisfaction mixed with vigilance. Months of deception had ended, yet emotional scars lingered. Emily's cruelty and manipulation were gone, but memory remains. Authority, I realized, is more than legal documents. It is presence, awareness, and clarity. Then my phone buzzed. A message from the lawyer. "There's one more thing, a document you haven't seen. Call immediately." My heart raced. Even now, after months of betrayal, the story was not fully over. One final secret remained, waiting to be revealed. I whispered softly, resolutely, "I will face it. I am Nana May. I am ready." And that was the moment the lawyer cleared his throat and said my name.